Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of the CFL Trade Tree. Right now you're asking yourself two questions. First question is, trade tree? Second is, second edition? I don't remember a first one, Dalton. Are you crazy? I'll answer that in just a little bit. A trade tree is something that sports geeks like myself like to investigate, just to see how a team managed to get their way to a championship title. You see a lot of these in the NHL, NFL, and NBA, which has somewhat inspired me to visit a trade tree in the CFL. It's quite interesting because it doesn't so often happen because of short contracts in the CFL. Not a lot of trades happen, and when they do happen, they're not exactly spectacular. The second edition, I got an answer for you because I was actually working on a different trade tree, and then while in production I was stupid and I said, hey, what's a good idea for a second trade tree? And I said, hey, that one's better than the first, so let's roll reverse here. And now we are visiting the idea of how Joe Mack indirectly gave the Toronto Argonauts 2 Grey Cups and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers their first Grey Cup since 1990.
Jyles, end zone. Touchdown! Terrence Edwards. Where will Jyles go? Looking middle. Now to corner. Carr. Open. And touchdown! Oh my!
Steven Jyles' 1 year in Winnipeg was, if there's a way to describe it, there's one word to describe it, it would be weird. And it all stems from January of 2010. Obviously, Winnipeg had his cleaned house. They didn't want anything to do with Mike Kelly and whatever kind of quarterbacks he brought in that year. The Bombers Board of Governors hired Joe Mack to be their GM. He hired Paul Police to be his head coach, and then they in turn signed Steven Jyles as their prize free agent signing in February from the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He was heralded to be the starting quarterback for 2010. You might know that didn't happen, of course, because the BC Lions threw a wrench into those plans. And that wrench was a guy by the name of Buck Pierce. See, he was with BC up until that time. Obviously, his injuries had kept him on the sidelines and not on the field. And therefore, Wally Bono, who likes to cut his veterans, in his best before date. And Buck Pierce was available. Winnipeg said, hey, we weren't really interested in Steven Jyles, but he was the best available. Buck Pierce, why don't you become a Bomber? And, well, all she wrote. Man, I said weird, and this is when it started often, because Buck Pierce, Steven Jyles, Adam DeMichael, pretty much every quarterback that the Bombers had were introduced at a press conference, and Steven Jyles looked like he saw a ghost, who then took his money and his best girl. Well, Buck Pierce was the starting quarterback in the 2010 season, and his first game really wasn't that bad. It actually was proof positive of why he was worth a pretty penny to bring him over to Winnipeg. But Buck Pierce's injury concerns came to fruition, and Steven Jyles started 11 games in 2010. Now, also what made Steven Jyles' 1 year in Winnipeg weird is the fact that he had, it wasn't the fact that he had 19 touchdowns. It wasn't those 7 interceptions. It wasn't the fact that he was the CFL's best efficient quarterback, or he had the best efficient rating among CFL passers that year. And the fact that he threw 2,800 yards wasn't that bad. No, what made it weird was in his 11 starts, he went 3-8 as a starter. And Joe Mack said, hey, I don't like that, and I'm going to, because I want production in the statings, I'm going to trade this guy. And credit to Joe Mack, because that was probably the one best thing he did as his time as GM in Winnipeg. And here comes the Steven Jyles trade tree. Whoa, that's a lot of explaining to do. That's a lot of explaining to do. Well, the Toronto side of thing is kind of, it's short, and most of it is the Ricky Ray trade. So let's start over with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. What did Winnipeg get for Steven Jyles? Well, they got a conditional 4th-round pick in 2012, and they got a 1st-round pick in 2011. That 1st-round pick was 4th overall because Toronto was bad. Well, guess what? Winnipeg was more bad. They had the 1st overall pick, and they picked linebacker Enoch Mwamba. Well, that was a great pick. Again, maybe the second best thing Joe Mack did his tenure as GM in Winnipeg. And that wasn't that bad as I said, but let's see. Well, you know what? Let's talk about that fourth overall in a bit, because there's not that much branches to this trade tree on the 2012 pick. Let's go to see what Joe Mack did with that one. Well, Steven Jyles actually played enough games in 2011, so that fourth round pick became a third round pick. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers selected the receiver Giovanni Aprilli. I butchered the name. I apologize. Now, I did say, kind of almost a defensive back, because Winnipeg almost tried to convert him to defensive back. They actually released him to go back to school, came back, didn't really amount to anything in 2013. The Bombers actually traded his rights to Hamilton in exchange for national defensive back Matt Buckner. Giovanni Aprilli didn't make it out of training camp in 2014. That end of the branch is there. What did Matt Buckner do? 2 years with the Bombers, 100 tackles, 3 interceptions. You're probably thinking, those 100 tackles for a defensive back, that's kind of high. Yeah, and then you consider the fact that the 2014 defense in Winnipeg was horrible against the run, and in 2015, they were on the field a lot because their offense sucked. And Matt Buckner in 2016, when the Winnipeg Blue Bombers decided to spend like sailors in free agency, Buckner wasn't in their plans, and he signed a free agent contract with the BC Lions. And that's the end of that trade tree. Well, that's the end of that branch. The first round pick in 2011 was very interesting. As I said, Enoch Mwamba was the first overall pick. So who did Winnipeg select fourth overall? Jade Etienne. Now, Jade is a polarizing figure in Winnipeg, and there's a lot of reasons why, and some of it's just, but it's unfair to Jade, because a lot of CFL scouting experts had Jade Etienne pegged about the fourth round, third tops. The fact that he got taken in the first round by any team was just a head scratcher. Well, it was Joe Mack, so, there's your answer. Jade Etienne in 2011 spent the majority of his time on the practice roster. In 2012, he played one game. He may have played more, but only on one catch for 11 yards. In 2013 was his breakout year. He had 20 catches, 280 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Breakout year, yeah. Welcome to the 2013 Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Tim Burke and Gary Crowton call those all-star numbers. Well, Joe Mack was actually canned halfway in the 2013 season. Kyle Walters takes over. Kyle Walters decides to wheel and deal. Now, before I get to this following trade, I should tell you that in 2014, obviously, they had a horrible year, 3-15. They wanted to get rid of as many quarterbacks as they could that year. They decided to go through free agency, or they tried to go through free agency. They tried to go to the recently released Zach Collaros, who came from Toronto and decided to stay closer to home in Hamilton. They went to Henry Burris, and he said, "Shove it. I'm not turning around your franchise. I want to go to the nation's capital in Ottawa." Well, they got desperate, and so they traded the rights to Jade Etienne to the Saskatchewan Roughriders in exchange for the rights to Drew Willie. Now, speaking of polarizing figures in Winnipeg, Drew Willie has got to be on the top 5 of those people in Winnipeg. And it was kind of unfair, but kind of fair. In 2014, he started the season 3-0. Not bad. They had just won 3 games the year prior in the whole season. So, boom, kudos to him. After 9 games, they were 6-3. Not bad. The last time that they had won 6 games in a whole season was just 2 years prior to that. Not bad. And then crap hit the fan. Injuries. Defense couldn't stop the run. People figured out that Winnipeg team. They ended up finishing the season 7-11. First, not great. But to lay that all on Drew Willie is kind of unfair. Yeah, he could have been better, but it's a team game, and that's proof positive in that aspect. In 2015, Drew Willie started the first 6 games 3-3 and then got injured. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit of what I like to call a trade bush. A trade bush is my terminology, and it has no lineage to this trade tree. It's just a little scuffle here and here, that because it was a trade that was made by necessity by this trade tree, and I'll fill you in on this one. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, when Drew Willie got hurt, they got tired of the Robert Marve and the Brian Brom experiment at quarterback, so they decided to shell out a conditional 7th round pick in 2017. This is in 2015. Let's just figure out how this works. They sent a conditional 7th round pick in 2017 to the Edmonton Eskimos in exchange for Matt Nichols. Not bad. You're just shelling out a pick, a conditional pick 2 years from now, and you get Matt Nichols, the guy who pretty much is responsible for turning around your franchise. Great. Until you realize what Edmonton got for that pick. Yeah. Well, Matt Nichols, spoiler alert, because we'll talk about that later on. Matt Nichols becomes starter, starts enough games. That conditional pick ends up being a 5th round pick in 2017, and the Eskimos, they select Kwaku Boateng. I love Matt Nichols to death. A lot of people, anybody who listens to our podcast know that my cohort, Tony Al, we love Matt Nichols. We're no longer explaining Matt Nichols. Matt Nichols is a god to us. Edmonton won that trade, and it didn't look like it at the time. Obviously, Edmonton had won the Grey Cup when they gave away Matt Nichols, and they kept Mike Riley at that time. What a trade. You get a bona fide ratio buster at defensive line, and Winnipeg could have used that, which we'll talk about in the next trade. So, 2016 happens. The Bombers hire Paul Appolice to be their offensive coordinator. Kyle Walters says, hey, enough. We got to at least make the playoffs this year, and we're going to find every free agent that we can find. Weston Dressler, check. Ryan Smith, check. Euclid Cummings, check. Keith Shulgin, check. Jeff Keepy, even though he didn't play a game in 2016 because he got injured in the preseason, check. Justin Medlock, we're going to need you to kick a lot more field goals. And Andrew Harris. Man, that was almost a qualified starting lineup that you could put on, and then Kyle Walters paid for it. And it worked out well. They made the playoffs. They were one and done by the BC Lions, but it worked. This Bomber team had started to turn the corner to respectability, which really kind of didn't look good when the season started. And I'll go back forward because it's key. It is a key thing to remember. Drew Willie was hoping to revitalize his career, and unfortunately it didn't happen. He started out 1-4. Mike O'Shea, seeing his writing on the wall, he saw his coaching clock ticking. He made the biggest gamble, and it paid off. He started Matt Nichols instead of Drew Willie in Edmonton. Matt Nichols won that game and then proceeded to win 9 of his next 12, including 7 in a row. Very good, considering the fact that Matt Nichols at this time was still synonymous with having freakishly season-ending injuries. Yeah, that trade on both sides, it worked out well for Winnipeg. It definitely still worked out well for Edmonton with what they got, but Winnipeg now has respect on their side. Let's go back into the summer, or actually it was the late summer of 2016, September 11th to be exact. It was a cool Sunday evening, and Winnipeg had an issue. Winnipeg had 2 quarterbacks, one getting W's, and one getting paid sitting on the sidelines. What to do? Well, Kyle Walters makes another trade. The second of 3 trades with Toronto involving quarterbacks. And this is an interesting trade because this involves another team, but we'll get into that a little bit. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers send Drew Willie to Toronto, and in exchange they get TJ Heath, a 3rd round in 2018, and a 1st round in 2017. Well, let's go with TJ Heath because he ended up signing a free agent deal in 2018 with Toronto. When he was traded to Winnipeg, he had already had 5 interceptions, leading the CFL at that time. He added an additional 2 with Winnipeg in 2016 to be tops in the CFL for interceptions. In 2017, he added an additional 5 to be second behind Ed Gainey in interceptions in 2017. That right there was good enough for Drew Willie. In my opinion, when you trade a guy who's not giving you production and is overpaid, and you get a guy that forces turnover, puts your offense in awesome field position, that made that trade more valuable. And now you've got 2 more picks to deal with? Not bad. Well, what did Winnipeg select with that first overall pick in the 2017? Faith Akakity. Now, a lot of GMs will be judged based on one draft pick that does not work out, and this one would be it. And Kyle Walters probably still hears it. unfortunately, I don't agree, and I don't agree with that aspect of that, because at that time, Faith Akakity was rated the top defensive line player that was available and was ready at that time, and he was taken first overall. Sometimes players don't work out, and that happens with every team, and it happens sometimes with the first overall pick. I mean, we saw it the year before that with Saskatchewan and Josiah St. John. This one should have worked, but it didn't, and unfortunately Winnipeg decided to cut their losses and cut Faith Akakity a year later in training camp going into the 2018 season. Great, that part's done. What did Winnipeg get for that third round in 2018? The Winnipeg selected receiver, Daniel Peterman. And right now you're probably thinking, hey, Daltz, hopefully you're not trying to think that Daniel Peterman is the reason the Bombers won the Grey Cup, therefore Joe Mack is responsible for that. No, and like I said Joe Mack was indirectly responsible for it based on that Steven Jyles trade. I want to go back to that Drew Willie trade in 2016. Because and a lot of you have probably noticed that there was a little blip in there. The Bombers gave up Drew Willie and, of course, kept Matt Nichols. There's a little hole behind center behind Matt Nichols, as you know. It's called a backup quarterback, and you're probably thinking, there's no way Winnipeg's stupid enough to go for a playoff run with Matt Nichols and Dom Davis. You're right. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers shipped a fourth-round pick in 2017 to the Montreal Alouettes for Kevin Glenn. Kevin Glenn didn't play that much for Winnipeg. In fact, he only played 2 drives in the last game, and that was it. He released and he signed on with the Saskatchewan Roughriders the next year. What did Montreal do with that fourth-round pick? Well, they packaged it with a 10th overall pick in 2018, and they sent it to the Saskatchewan Roughriders for Darian Durant. And before you get your underwears all in knots here, I'm not insisting that Darian Durant retiring is the reason why the Bombers got Chris Traveler. That's a stretch, all right? Let's not go through that leg of conversation, okay? Darian Durant ended his career technically in Montreal, even though he retired while being signed with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. That part of that branch is done. What did Saskatchewan do with that 10th overall pick and the fourth round pick in 2017? Well, the fourth round pick they used to select Eddie Meredith, offensive lineman, great talent. If this works out and pans out, and it very well could still, Chris Jones and John Murphy are going to look like freaking geniuses. The problem is that Eddie Meredith notified a lot of teams that he was not interested in football. He had an issue with an illness, and he forced him to lose a lot of weight, made him step away from football temporarily. Now he's still trying to make a comeback. He still do belong to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but Saskatchewan does have a little bit of depth on the offensive line. It's not great, but it's still depth nonetheless. I don't anticipate this guy working out, but never say never. What did the Saskatchewan Roughriders do with that 10th overall pick that they got from Montreal? Well, they shipped it off to Hamilton for Zach Collaros. And now you're starting to get a picture as to what I'm meaning about the Bombers winning the Grey Cup. Before we go there, let's go to what Hamilton did with that 10th overall pick. Well, they packaged that with a 20th overall pick, and they sent that to Edmonton in exchange for a 6th, 15th, and 37th overall pick in the 2018 draft. Because that branch ends there, let's go with what Hamilton selected. 37th overall receiver Justin Buren, 15th overall was Brett Wade, and 6th overall Darius Sirocco. Really good. Hamilton came out good, and they weren't even the primary players in this trade. What did Edmonton get for that 10th and 20th overall pick? Well, in 10th, they selected Godfrey Onyeka. 2 seasons under his belt, a couple special teams tackles, nothing to write home about. But at this point, because of the lack of depth in going into 2020 season, if there is going to be a 2020 season, I suspect that he should actually get a lot more playing time. That 20th overall pick was packaged with the rights to James Franklin and sent to Toronto in exchange for Mason Woods. Mason Woods still hasn't played that much. In fact, I don't even know if he's still with the organization. He very well could be on their practice roster. the Toronto Argonauts took that 20th overall pick, and they selected running back Regis Sibasu. And I apologize if I mispronounced that name. A couple of touches here, a couple of tackles and special teams. The fact that they've gone away with James Wilder Jr. and Anthony Coombs is now in Ottawa. This might be the year where this guy gets a lot of touches this year. Now, let's go all the way back. Remember, I talked about Zach Collaros. The Saskatchewan Roughriders had an okay year. They finished the season second overall in the West. They lost that one. The injuries to Zach Collaros was just too much for them to handle. And of course, 3 plays into the 2019 season, everybody knows what happened.
The Rough Riders, Collaros, he'll pull it down, take off, and a feet first slide. Did take a hit from Simone Lawrence.
Zach Collaros. The pine for the most of the season in Saskatchewan. The emergence of Cody Fajardo and the interest in backup quarterback Isaac Harker made this deal a little bit more reliable. The Saskatchewan Roughriders shipped Zach Collaros to the Toronto Argonauts in exchange for a conditional 5th-round pick. Now, the conditions obviously weren't met, so that 5th-round pick in 2020 ended up being receiver Kieran Schaefer-Baker. And again, the jury's still out because, well, he hasn't played because COVID. This is the Toronto Argonauts, though. And let's go to that trade bush. You remember I told you about Matt Nichols? Well, he still played for Winnipeg up until week 9 against the BC Lions. And he suffered a season-ending injury, although they didn't really confirm it until 2 months later. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers were in desperation mode, and they reached out to Toronto, and they said, hey, we got to make a trade. You want to give us James Franklin? And he said, no, how about Zach Collaros? Sure. The Toronto Argonauts get a 3rd-round pick in 2020 and a conditional pick in 2020. And that conditional pick was 1st overall. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, we know what happened.
They have put the win back in Winnipeg. The Blue Bombers, 2019 Grey Cup champions.
Zach Collaros wins the Grey Cup, ending the 29-year drought. And lo and behold, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers make a shocking decision, releasing Matt Nichols, signing Zach Collaros to a 2-year deal, therefore making that conditional 1st-round pick official. What did Toronto use with that pick? Well, they selected offensive lineman Dylan Giffen, and in the 1st overall pick, they selected another offensive lineman, Theron Churchill. And that ends that trade tree. That was a pretty long video. It's like almost 20 minutes, and I'm not done. All right, let's talk about the Toronto side of things. Okay, what did they get with Steven Jyles? A horrible season in 2011. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't what they expected it to be. So in December of 2011, Jim Barker says, hey, we need a better quarterback. And the CFL say, the Edmonton Eskimos say, hey, we've got a young quarterback for you. Obviously, conspiracy theories would indicate that the CFL was in on this, forcing it because Toronto was hosting the 100th Grey Cup, yada, yada, yada. Well, the trade is Steven Jyles, a 1st round in 2012, and punter Grant Shaw for Ricky Ray. I mean, we should just end this video on that alone. How do you get Ricky Ray and not win this trade tree? Seriously. Like, you could lose a couple of trades, and obviously, we went through the Winnipeg side of things, how they lost. They got Ricky Ray. Seriously. We should end this video now. But I won't. What did Edmonton do with that 1st-round pick? Well, they kind of packaged that with a 20th overall pick in the 2012 draft to the BC Lions. BC selected with that 2nd overall pick, and they selected Jabbar Westerman. Jabbar Westerman didn't end up too much playing time in BC, or at least it wasn't a big factor as they expected him to be. They let him test free agency, and now he's wandering around Montreal, Calgary. He's doing something. That 20th overall pick was sent to Hamilton, and Hamilton selected Michael Atkinson, who, injuries concerned, is not with the club at this time. And you're probably thinking, hey, Dalton, what did Hamilton send back? Well, here's the thing with this trade tree, and it kind of loses its dust around this time. It appears that this pick was sent to Hamilton in lieu of the Arlen Bruce trade a year prior. And right now, yeah, I can see your questions. Your eyes are rolling. You're saying, well, wait a minute. They just got that pick in this draft. How did they know that they were going to get that to send it in exchange for Arlen Bruce? And my response is, it's the CFL? I don't know. Now, there could be an explanation here, and I do remember hearing this, and I don't even know if it's this part, and I couldn't find anything on Google, but it could be one of those things where a team decided to trade a draft pick that they didn't have. You would think that would happen for Joe Mack, and you would think it would be Kavis Reed, but I do remember it being around this time. Obviously, if you can fact check this, leave a comment below, and I will get back to you during the next video. What did the Edmonton Eskimos get out of this pick? Well, they kept them. They selected them. For the first time in this trade tree, they didn't package anything with these picks, so let's go with what they have. The Edmonton Eskimos, 4th overall, they select Austin Passport. I wouldn't have done it. There's a guy who is probably not going to be in the CFL at this time, and luck would have it, he's still in the NFL at this point, I believe, with the Tennessee Titans. 14th overall, Justin Capicotti. Not a bad pick. Justin Capicotti put together a great career before being cut by Hamilton this past offseason. It's just unfortunately that his numbers in all his career, a lot of it was even with Edmonton. He played enough to warrant him in 2013 with Edmonton to warrant Marcel Desjardins to take him in the expansion draft. That's pretty much the tale of Justin Capicotti. Who did the Edmonton Eskimos take 38th overall? Long snapper Ryan King. And that would be how Joe Mack in 2011, gave the Winnipeg Blue Bombers their first Grey Cup in 29 years, and Toronto 2 Grey Cups. I'm not going to be talking about that. Usually at the end of these trade trees, we'll maybe grade and see how every team did that was participating. Although in a 9-team league, it's really tough to grade these. 5 of these teams weren't really involved. I mean, BC was only involved in the Jabbar Westerman deal. Calgary wasn't involved at all. Edmonton was involved, and we'll talk more about that. Saskatchewan was only involved because they made a trade with Montreal, who itself wasn't really involved. There's 4 teams that you really need to judge in this. They were the Hamilton Tiger Cats, Toronto Argonauts, Edmonton Eskimos, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Let's talk Hamilton first. They did very good. They come out of this with 3 great prospects, and they got rid of Zach Collaros. And I'm not disrespecting Zach Collaros. He had injury concerns in 2017, and they have a guy by the name of Jeremiah Mazzoli and a guy by the name of Dane Evans. They come out of this like, I don't know. They come out of this awesome. It's true. The Hamilton, really not a primary player, ended up ripping off a lot of these teams, to be honest with you. The Edmonton Eskimos, though, yeah, they made that trade bush work out in their favor, but a lot of their trades that they have didn't work out to them, and yet the Godfrey Onyeka one probably may work out if this season pans out, maybe even 2021. It's just, there's a small part of me that has a tough time arguing for the Edmonton Eskimos being good at this when they traded Ricky Ray and end up with Ryan King. No disrespect to Ryan King, you just expect more. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, yeah, they won the Grey Cup. Yeah, it took them 8 years later to do it, but the goal when you're making these trades is to win the Grey Cup. Joe Mack did it. Joe Mack actually made a few of these. Kyle Walters, you got to hand him, when the moment he took over, that was his one goal, as is the case with every other GM. Draft, develop, trade, Grey Cup. They get Zach Collaros and Daniel Peterman, who is a top-tier national receiver. And all you had to do at the beginning is give up Steven Jyles. Not bad. The Toronto Argonauts. Yeah, they got fleeced in a couple of those trades, but they come out with a couple of prospects who we probably won't even see until 2021. I've always said that in order to be a successful franchise in the CFL, you need 3 things. National depth, a quarterback, and a great offensive line. Well, these prospects settled 2 of them. Matt Nichols coming in with Ryan Dinwiddie coaching the Argonauts. That may or may not work, but 2 out of 3 still is not bad. And 7 years of Ricky Ray and 2 Grey Cups. They did really well in this one. Well, that'll do it for this edition of the CFL Trade Tree. Hope you liked it. If you liked it, leave a comment below. If you have a suggestion for another Trade Tree, again, leave a comment below. If you want to get in contact with me directly, hey, we're available at my podcast. Email thenewrouge@gmail.com, or if you're on social media on Twitter, you can follow myself at Rouge Dalton. The podcast account is at Rouge Radio, and if you want, follow my co-host Tony Allen at Tony Rouge. And this has been powered by the Canadian Football Podcast Network. You can follow them at CF Pod Network on Twitter.